What's up, and welcome to Three Brothers and a Shot of Milk. Now today I'm going to be dropping this video of how I put together this arguably definitive McFarlane Death and Return of Superman display case. In order to do so, you're going to need a whole slew of McFarlane action figures. You're going to need Superboy, Eradicator, Man of Steel. You're going to need the Black Suit Superman. Obviously, you're going to want the Doomsday Superman figures. You're going to need a whole slew of figures to modify and mutilate. Red Sun Superman, the War World Superman. You're going to have to create a Cyborg Superman, which doesn't exist in the McFarlane line as of date. You're going to need Superman and Krypto, so you get the long hair version of Superman. You're kind of going to need two of those if you really want to get the long hair in the appropriate spots. And we're going to do it, like I said, a whole lot of modifications to make these guys look like the appropriate 90s version of the characters. In addition to the action figures, we're going to need some comic books to mutilate. You're going to need that Death and Return of Superman. In addition to that, you're going to want the Skybox 90s Superman cards, the Doomsday Death and Return of Superman, the Death of Superman, and you're going to need the Return of Superman. And most importantly, we're going to need a game plan for the layout of the display. So here's mine. Okay, so Superman pre-Doomsday, Doomsday into the battle, Reign of Superman, Superman returns in the black suit, and then we have Superman current day. Okay, so one of the final processes in making this, I'm going to do a two-part chemical epoxy pour over the foundation, and then I'm going to reattach the figures to it. So here's what we got going on. I think I've completed my background pass of this. It's looking really good to me. So now the next thing I'm going to do, I got some pigment I might throw in there while the epoxy's mixing up. I got this 1-for-1 two-part epoxy pour that I'm going to mix and pour over the thing. All right, here we go. Okay, so I've done the first pass of epoxy. Now, the nice thing about epoxy is it tends to seek out level. So it'll eventually kind of level itself out if you let it sit. And then if it starts bubbling up, what you want is a little blowtorch to get all the bubbles out, make it nice. Now what I'm going to beta test here is in certain sections, I'm going to add some pops of acrylic paint to see if I can't, embed a little paint within the epoxy itself as it kind of dries and sets up. All right. Now, one thing is I can see images of the other side of the comic books, and I'm hoping that as it dries, it'll go back to just kind of showing the top layer, not the bottom and top layer. But we'll see how that turns out. All right. That's the first pour. All right, so I added little pops of color within the epoxy, and I think it's going to have a really cool effect. It almost feels, three-dimensional in nature, because it's actually, it's raised off the image. So I didn't do a lot, but I did a few little sections to kind of enhance the experience. And now I think I'm going to try to torch it a little bit. See if I can make some of this milky quality go away. It might have been a failure to really get a proper mixture, but you should be able to get these bubbles out by heat treating it. So here we go. Next steps. All right, one of the final stages is what you want to do is torch out any bubbles or imperfections. Just gonna well, it's looking really good actually. Don't see many bubbles. Don't see many imperfections. You can see how the paper has gone translucent. I can see to the other side of the comic there. No bubbles here. Not bad. Not bad, really not bad. Just a few little bubbles. Not entirely sure how I think the torch is going to interact with the paint. Oop. So this takes about 48 hours to fully cure if you're going to do a second pour. I don't see myself needing a second pour. And I think 24 hours of set time will be long enough for me to reaffix the action figures to it. That's pretty good. I'll give it one more little pass over, then we'll come back and take a look. So this is looking really great after the first pour and torch. See almost no bubbles at all in here. It's really good. After this sets up in about a day's time, I'll come back and I'll put the action figures back into it. Still got the holes here for where I tie them down. Shouldn't be any problem at all getting them back on. This is definitely, doing the epoxy has definitely enhanced this thing. And that's kind of what I was hoping would happen. Felt like it was missing something. And I think this epoxy is just gonna... Now I'm hoping these dry out a little better. I think even if they don't, it's okay. This is looking so good. You can see the image of the comic behind it. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, well, let's come back in a day and see how it's settled. Boom. Okay, so This is after it's sat up. It looks really good. I did learn a rather important lesson though. If you're using paper, like old school 90s comic book paper, you actually have to seal it first with like a polyurethane before you put the epoxy on it. Otherwise, it will stay translucent. So you see straight through that image onto the image of the other side of the page because it's permanently wet. And that happened with all of these images. You can see, you know, Superman flying on the other side of Superman and Lois kissing. It's not so prominent in some of them, but you definitely see the image behind the image. All right, well, I learned a lesson the hard way. Some of these older, more vintage comic books didn't have like a waxy finish to it. And so when you epoxy over it, they turn transparent, translucent almost. You see the image on the front and the back of the page. And so the only way to get around that is to seal the page with like a polyurethane or urethane first. So what I did is I polyurethaned over these, and then I reattached the image of the guys who I don't want transparent. I want a little clearer here. Let me flip the camera. For example, I cut this guy back in. You can see on the one under it, you can see through it, and it had all the text. And I feel like that's such an important image to get clean. So I cut Superman Doomsday's arm back in, and I put that one back. This one, I don't have enough comics to get that and this, because this was the dollar version of it. And the dollar version of it actually had a different layout. So that image is actually on the back of that picture. So I picked this one instead. Now, I felt it was important to see the kiss. So we got that back in. I put this guy back in here, Lois's head. Just a little funny, her floating, but whatever. It's a good moment. Put in Lois here. I'm debating about putting Jimmy in. Put the parents' hug in. Got the eyes. These are the ones that were real important for me to get back in. Obviously, John Henry Irons, Steel, Superboy, Eradicator, and you know, Cyborg. So I'm gonna let this set up for a day, and then I'll come back and do another light epoxy pour over it so I can blend these images in with the background, get that high gloss finish. And it should kind of have almost, you know, three-dimensional quality to it, because they're kind of really popping off the page now, which is cool. And so it's going to take another day to finish, but that's okay. And I learned a lesson. I did seal these on the front and back of it, so hopefully that really kind of solves the issue I was having with the transparency. Which is actually a cool effect if you're going for it. But I really don't want that in certain sections, and these characters are so important to get popping, and this moment was so important to have. So it was worth just kind of redoing certain sections to get it to look right. Otherwise, it's looking really good. All right, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes mistakes are the things that really make the project just come to life. Let me show you what ended up happening after I fixed the mistake. So after I fixed the mistake, this is what it looks like. And look how well these guys turned out. I mean, this mistake might have ended up being the best thing about the project. It added a whole three-dimensional quality to the image itself before I've even added the action figures back onto it. Just sick. For future reference though, and that really worked, if you seal the image with a polyurethane or urethane, before you put the epoxy over it, there's no bleed. So good, man, so good. Honestly, this enhances this so much. Just great. So cool. All right. So next step is I let this cure for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. I let it cure. I'll let it cure for about a day. And then I will drill out the holes again, put the action figures back on, maybe add LEDs to it. And then this guy is done. Backdrop is looking great.
y'all? Welcome to Three Brothers and a Shot of Milk.